Up until he was 6.5 years old, we had tried about everything that there was to try. And he was on medication at that time when, in a fit of rage, he was going to carve up my body. He came after me with a butcher knife.
We already had gone through the second grade where the teacher actually said to him, "Why did you have to come back to school today? It was so nice when you were absent."
Mothers of hyperactive children face those kind of challenges every day. And even more disturbing to them is new research indicating that 1 out of 2 untreated hyperactive children is arrested for a felony crime, and 1 out of 4 is institutionalized in his teens. I'm Pat Mitchell. Today on Woman to Woman, meet mothers of hyperactive children and learn how they cope.
Woman to woman, face to face, coming together from many places, asking the questions one at a time, finding that the answers were there all the time. And I'm so glad I'm a woman. I'm so glad I can say woman to woman, woman to woman, woman to woman, every day.
There has no doubt been those moments in the lives of every parent when we have thought, this child must be hyperactive. Fortunately, for most of us, it's not the case. But for a lot of parents around this country, it is the case. They are, in fact, dealing with a hyperactive child. And recently, there's been some new research which I'm sure has caused some concern among those parents and has also caused some concern among society in general. Or maybe concern is not the word, attention is a better word. At the California Child Study Foundation, some recent research indicated that untreated hyperactive children stand a 75% better chance of becoming school failures or dropouts, that 46% of untreated hyperactive children stand a better chance of being arrested on felony charges as teenagers, and that 1 in 4 stand a better chance of becoming institutionalized. Now, these statistics are frightening to parents of hyperactive children, but they also say to all of us it's time to pay attention to this problem, find out more about it, and above all, find out how to diagnose it and treat it. We recently paid a visit to the California Child Study Foundation, where Mrs. Brina Satterfield and her husband, Dr. James Satterfield, are doing some new research into diagnosis and into treatment. Let's take a visit there and then meet the mothers who are with us today who do, in fact, have hyperactive children.
How many kids in the class are your friends? Do you have any friends in your class?
No.
Gary, why do I get the feeling that sometimes school is a little sad for you?
Hyperactivity affects from 2 to 5 million youngsters in the United States today. It's the cause of anguish for 1 out of every 10 boys. Now, this may look like a game Gary's playing, but it's called brain mapping, and it's helping give new understanding to a heartbreaking problem.
Brain mapping gives you a visual picture of the brain potential in all the different areas of the brain. And I think if you look at the pictures, you can see that they look different. And the difference is where on the scalp the lights and the darks are occurring. And that's the negative and positive voltages. Where they're occurring are different in these two groups. But a lot of people, you see, think that there really isn't anything wrong with the child. There's only something wrong with his parents or the environment or society or the teachers. But this very clearly indicates there's something different about these children.
And one of the most obvious differences is in anger that often leads to juvenile delinquency.
We treated a number of these children, actually 110, along with a group of control children, followed them up into adolescence, average age of about 17 years, and roughly half of these formerly hyperactive children had already been arrested for a felony crime, and this rate was about 10 to 20 times higher than it was in our normal control group.
You are going to start doing what you traditionally do with your father, which is arguing, okay? Which makes your father angry, okay? And I suspect that when you're arguing, you're really angry, all right? I want you to both get up and do that.
Did you do your homework?
Yes?
I'd like to see it.
Although family therapy is critical, facing a child's anger can be horrifying and painful.
How are you feeling about me now, Terry?
Oh, I'm feeling sick and tired of you.
Are you angry at me?
Well, yes, it does get me, like, uptight and mad, even when it is a simulation.
Hyperactive children start out as lovable as anyone else, and that by the time they're 19, if half of them become felony delinquents, we've lost that life, we've lost that child.
Why do you think the kids don't like you?
Beats me.
Do you like you?
Yes, I like me.
What do you like about you?
That I'm like one of a kind. Well, I'm unique.
That is certainly true, isn't it? Every mother in this room just went, you better believe it. Very unique. We'll talk with Mrs. Satterfield in a moment more about the treatments and the information that we see there being done at the foundation. But I'm interested from some of you as mothers, what was your reaction to that link between hyperactivity, untreated hyperactivity, and criminal activity? Pat, is that possible for your sons? Do you fear a kind of antisocial behavior from them?
Oh, it is. It's frightening. Yes, it's frightening to hear these statistics, you know. But that's why you should try to get treatment, do the best you can, I feel. You know, I'm thankful. My son was in nursery school when he was only 3, and they told me there, you know, I would have my son evaluated if I were you, because they said by 3 he should be settling down, and he never, just constantly on the move. So I took him to UCLA, and that's where I started.
But that link frightens you even now.
Well, certainly. No one wants to hear that. We're hopeful that our children won't end up that way. That's why we're trying so hard.
Sherry, you have 2 foster brothers who are hyperactive, and in fact, one of them did end up, or is in prison.
He is in jail right now.
So it must be a link that certainly frightens you personally.
Yes, which is why I fought my own son's diagnosis for years and could not see it, because they weren't quite as physically hyperactive as my foster brothers were. And there was a lot of other factors in them too. You know, we got them at 11 months of age and they had been abused, but they're 23 now, and one is reasonably successful. You know, he's hyper, but he's the type that had enough education that he turns and he has 3 or 4 businesses, and you know, we all know those kind, you know, the vice president's at 30, you know, if you don't have severe learning disabilities and you have a decent home, sometimes you can turn that into, but the other one is just a total disaster. And he had all the drug therapy and the psychotherapy, everything, but at a certain point, you just can't make the child. When they're teenagers, he just went off, you know, and there's only so much you can do. So I agree with these statistics, and when I can see my own children when they were smaller and before we had them under control, it was frightening, because the anger, I said, my God, translate that anger into someone who weighs 180 pounds with a gun in his hand, you know, who's just so irrationally angry that you cannot see, and it's frightening.
But of course, with treatment, the good news is that things can change. But it does begin with diagnosis, so stay with us, because we want to talk about how you recognize a hyperactive child. I said at the beginning, a lot of parents think they have hyperactive children and find out indeed they don't. And yet there are probably some undiagnosed hyperactive children around too. Sandy, when did you see, what were the symptoms? When did you recognize that there was a problem?
When Terry started school, we knew there was a problem, but we weren't sure what that problem was. My son was in a gifted magnet and expressing antisocial behavior, hitting, disturbing the class. So I went to seek psychiatric care for the family. Tell me what my problem is. And the psychiatrist that I went to, who charged about $80 an hour, after 8 sessions said to me, I don't know what the problem is, but I can tell you your son is not hyperactive. And I said, well, what is he? And he says, I don't know. It must be you and your husband.
Oh, boy.
We left that, and we left this gifted magnet where they literally refused to address his needs, and went to the California Child Study Foundation. When we went through an evaluation process, and Mrs. Satterfield said on a scale of 1 to 10, your son is a 10, he could have knocked me over.
Yeah.
And I see children all the time that are 10s, and no one knows because they're not moving all the time. People think of hyperactive kids as moving, constantly moving. And Terry can sit down and work the most intricate puzzle or process. If he's interested, he can stay there for hours and do it beautifully. So no one knows.
So that's an interesting thing to point out, that they're not always active and moving about. No. How about Bernice? What were the symptoms?
Well, when I was asked about coming on the show and someone said hyperactive, was talking about hyperactivity, I said, that doesn't seem like my son. I've always thought of him as hypoactive. He was a very quiet, withdrawn child. He sits and listens to tape recorder, reads a lot, avid reader. He wasn't up breaking things and tearing things apart. I was told he had emotional hyperactivity. So I realized by the time he was about 1 year old that he wasn't like a normal child. By the time he was 3 and a half, I was going to go to the psychiatrist or someone. I thought, I must have a problem. The physicians say he doesn't have a problem. He's a slow child. He'll outgrow it. I was getting crazy. You know, it's me or it's the child.
I think the most dangerous thing is the statement, don't worry, they'll grow out of it. And, you know, my own personal experience tells me over and over again, after watching other children besides my own, that it's not something they grow out of. It may become less severe. Being a hyperactive adult now, I mean, I know that it's still there within me, but I have learned controls, and I think it was harder for me to recognize because I was able to run around after mine. I mean, that was my level of activity too. I mean, I couldn't get enough things to do, so I have to laugh at myself and saying maybe I didn't see it as clearly.
Because you were doing the same thing yourself.
Exactly, exactly. And being a professional doesn't necessarily help. Yeah. It was only when, you know, the teacher in kindergarten said to me, look, you've got this state-identified gifted child, but he can't sit on the rug, and he's not learning to read, and he's not doing any of the appropriate things that he's supposed to be doing. And I said, uh-oh, I think I've heard this story before someplace, and decided I needed to do some exploration myself on that basis.
My youngster's an adopted child, and when I picked him up from the hospital, the nursery nurses said to me, you got yourself a winner. If I were you, I would not sign the papers for a while. I thought they were crazy.
This is when he's in a crib.
This is 3 days old.
3 days old.
3 days old.
How about, you can tell.
Said,
sometimes.
No way, this child is beautiful and wonderful, and there's no way that I'm going to listen to you, and he's ours. Well, by the time he was 12 months old, he had destroyed 2 cribs. 2. Couldn't even bolt them or wire them together. I was tying him in bed with a leg restraint. By the time he was 3 and a half, I was out in the community and exhausted all resources in terms of psychiatrists, pediatricians, anybody that had anything to offer at all, we were there. They, you know, could find nothing definite that they could tell me after 8.5 months of psychiatry. Therapy for me, child therapy for him, play therapy, behavior modification, you know, and I would say, all right, now we've been here 8 months. What do I do when he hits his little brother over the head and makes it bleed? Oh, well, he's having his time. This is your time. We won't talk about that today. At one point, one of the good doctors even decided that I was so unstable that my youngster ought to be in protective custody and wrote a letter to that effect to his new doctor. It was an incredible experience of undermining my ability as a parent and myself as a person.
One of the things that's going to change, that we're changing and is going to change even more, is the beginning statement of the pediatrician who sees the child, and when a hyperactive child is in a doctor's office, he's a little scared. So he's a little bit aroused in the brain sense, which means that he is paying a lot of attention. And with good brain arousal comes good inhibition of your behavior. So it's almost as though when he's in the pediatrician's office, he's just had some medicine, he's under best behavior, and the mother says, this child is hyperactive, please help me. And the doctor says, sitting perfectly still, I see nothing. Have a Valium, mother dear, it is you, okay? Actually, what we now know is hyperactivity is not made through emotional interactions. There are emotional consequences later on.
Right.
Children are born with it. We see the differences in their neurophysiology and the functioning of the electricity in their brain. Usually there's some history of it in the family, and when we evaluate these 6-year-old children, they come in and they say, well, the doctor said it's me and not my child, and we can see the differences. So we're changing that, and we hope more pediatricians learn to do the careful history, learn to do the history of the family background. I had a grandfather who...
There is some connection to family background.
A genetic link has not yet been established, but we find an elevated incidence of alcoholism in the family, of hyperactivity, of learning problems, and some hysteria in the mothers of hyperactive children. So you see more of that. That doesn't mean everyone has it.
Yeah. But overall, the good news is that mom is not to blame, and that this child does not come from an emotional interaction, but is born with it.
Well, we think he's born with it, okay? We have no definite proof in terms of the genetic code. Now, remember, my husband's a researcher, although I'm a clinician. I've got to be careful. We think they're born with it, yes, and we see patterns inherited through the family. We haven't yet found the gene.
Yeah, all right, but that's a good place to stop and take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue. Once you know that you have a hyperactive child in the home, it may be even before you know, there's an impact certainly on everybody else who's in that home, the husband, the in-laws, the extended family, and of course the other children. Patricia, I'm thinking of your story. Your husband left you actually while you were pregnant with this son, and when his hyperactivity was discovered, you really had to make some major sacrifices in your own life. Can you
I
talk
was
about
working
that?
in Manhattan, and I had a very big job as a president of a large company. And I sent Tommy home at Christmas time, and I found that he was a much different child living with his grandmother in the house than he was in New York and all the routines that I was going through. And I went back to New York, and I said to myself, I've got to make a big change. I went to UCLA. Sad thing about it, they lost his records. He was in a Catholic school. The Catholic schools were not able to handle hyperkinetic children. They only can handle really normal children. They're not set up. And finally, I found Brita Satterfield, and she was in a little house. She had just started out. And we had a male doctor, and I thought that was very good because there was a male influence. And he started to calm down, and I put him on Ritalin, and he came home, and he wanted to know what was wrong with him. And I think the thing that really and truly made me know that he knew there was something wrong was he went to camp. And he said to me, I must go back to the foundation, and I must get back on the medicine. And I said, why? All the children line up in the camp line, and he says, I can't do it because I always stand on the shadows, and there's something wrong with me. So here was a little boy, 6 years old, knowing that in the morning he wasn't going to have a good day.
Joyce, you also were an artist, something
Yes.
you really found you could not continue to do
Yes,
with a
I had-
hyperactive child in the family?
I was doing work in the home, designing, and I found as he got older, there just was no way I could continue doing it. I had to give that up. We've decided to make big changes in our lifestyle, simplify things so that we can devote more time to what he needs, what the immediate needs
Does that
are
mean
for
no
him.
time for you and your husband, no time for family vacations,
A
no
little.
time for... Tell me what that means, no time for.
Well, we're just changing all the things that we did. We adopted one of the boroughs that was going to be shot, and we went through a lot of training, driving it, thinking that this would be something we could do as a family. But it's not something that he can do without being watched constantly, and you can't do two things at once. So that's going to go, and we're going to concentrate strictly on small camping trips where we can be very close, watch him constantly without really letting him know that we're watching him, but be right there for him all the time. He doesn't do very good in team sports, so we're going to have to go to individual sports, things that we can do with him, or it's a one-to-one type thing. We got him a dog, thinking that would help, giving him a buddy that's not another child to compete with, or...
Did the dog survive?
The dog survived, it really did. After my training and everything, it survived. But we found, too, that it was too much for him, just too much for him to concentrate on.
What about other children? What happens to the other child, the non-hyperactive children?
That's hard, too. He has a younger sister in kindergarten, and I find that when he gets real worked up, she either has fear in her face that he might hurt her, or what's going to happen between him and I if he gets very upset, or she doesn't want to be around him, or I have to say, look, when he's like this, doing these things, please come to me, or go in your room, or find something else to do, because I fear for her, because he gets very violent at times.
Yes, they do get very violent.
Yes.
My youngest is not hyperactive. He gets all A's in school, and he's the star athlete on the basketball team and the soccer team. And he has lots of friends, and he's also very aggressive, which is good because this way the older brother doesn't push him around, and he can hold his own. But he, as a matter of fact, often takes the responsibility as an older child. He will tell my son, no, that's dangerous. The older brother, don't do that, that's dangerous, or you might get hurt, or something like that. But the older one gets very distressed because he says, you give all your attention to the younger one, not realizing that he really gets 90% of the attention because you have to give it to them, and yet the little one is getting all the positive attention. He's getting 90% of your attention, but it's negative attention. Don't do this, and don't do this. And you'd be better off doing that.
Yeah. What about you touched on it, the social issues of going into public places. the grocery store when the child decides that's the moment to say, what about that, Della?
It's very embarrassing to have people look at you or make comments of what kind of a mother is she? She's not doing anything. Can't you keep them under control? And it's very frustrating. You do the best you can. You're working at it. You've got someone helping you. And you're striving for a goal. And they don't see it because they don't know what you're putting up with.
They just think you have an uncontrollable child.
Yeah, they think that you're a rotten mother.
Yeah, and you should discipline them
yes.
or something.
An alternative to that is to stay home. We didn't leave the house till he was 5 years old, and then it was on a
but
harness.
that's kind of hard to do
and
when you have to go
people
shopping or...
to that harness was not worth the little excursions out.
Oh, yes.
The hyperactive youngster, at least in my case, his whole sensory system is hyper also. Cold is freezing, hot is too hot. Fortunately, the area that we live in, the houses are wide apart, so there wasn't a lot of neighborhood influence, and that's helped him a lot in not getting outside negative influence back, because wherever he went, it was very definitely negative, and he felt that.
What about your own relationship with your husband, Colleen? That suffered as well, didn't it?
Well, he would not acknowledge the fact that we had a problem and would not even sanction my visits to the psychiatrist and the study centers and the things that I went through, and ultimately, after having left the home was when I finally got things going for Jeff. And that was the only reason.
It's clear that the whole family is a part of this and suffers from it. We'll be back in a minute. Mrs. Satterfield, we're hearing these mothers talk about the antisocial behavior that goes on within the home and outside the home, and there is that classic image of the mother with the hyperactive child in the middle of the store and screaming, and people going, why don't you do something with that brat? What does a parent do in those public situations?
What happens in the school situation and in the grocery store is a child is acting inappropriately, out of control. He cannot control himself. Now a mother has to do something or ignore it. And depending on the skill and sensitivity of the mother, she will either attempt to manage her child despite the negative comments that she's hearing. And I know exactly what mothers feel because I often take hyperactive children out where no one knows that I'm not their mother, and people say horrible things to me. Like, what's wrong with you, lady? You're a child, just whatever the child did. So mothers with some training have learned how to manage their children by asking for what they want and mentioning what the consequence will be for compliance, which is a positive reward. And in our foundation, we do a lot of behavior modification and parent training so that parents learn ways of saying, Johnny, I want you to keep your hands to yourself and not knock down this row of cans. And if you can do that, and I know it's hard for you, I will give you or help you or let you something that he wants to do. We'll come at the end of that. This is the paycheck for hard work, and this is hard work for those kids.
What we find is that we can't help a child unless we also have the parents working with us as part of that.
Yeah.
So throughout the child's day, not just at school, you know, while they're doing their work or with their teachers or those people who are supposed to be able to do that, but also the parents are invited in, they're part of the process of deciding, and they participate in that, and they need support. They need a parent support group. They need support from specialists in order to get some ideas about how to approach some of these problems.
Let me tell you something exciting that we did. We took a team, and you know that we developed the multi-modality treatment of hyperactive children, which means they don't get a psychiatrist or a psychologist. They get a whole team, including educational therapy, and it's done as appropriate for each child. Well, we took another group of children, and we gave them this multi-modality treatment, and we just released our results at the American Academy of Child Psychiatry. We cut that delinquency rate by treating the hyperactive children with multimodality therapy by 50%. We cut that incarceration rate that you saw earlier in the program, again by 50%, with 3 years of an intensive multimodality treatment program in which the parents are on the team. But there's also a bunch of professionals on the team.
This, you know, sounds really exciting, and I know that it's probably going to open a lot of doors. Do you see this modality as being available countrywide so that people in all areas will have the opportunity to take advantage of this?
Well, it's not available very frequently. As we publish our papers and professionals read them in the professional literature, they emulate our model. In other words, our job is to be at the cutting edge of new knowledge. That's what our foundation is about. So we publish our papers, and other places write for them, talk to us on the phone, read the papers, develop their own institutes using this kind of therapy, and that has become a trend to use multiple therapies under one roof, coordinated by one person.
But then you're talking about probably years in the future when there would be enough of these places that people in most areas would have availability.
There will never be enough. There are 2 to 3 million hyperactive children in this country. That's 1 out of every 10 boys. So you can carpet the country, I suspect, with facilities, and there probably won't be enough. Most of these children are not detected.
So then you...
Are you involved in Mrs. Satterfield's foundation?
No.
No, we've never met.
No, I'm out in Riverside County.
And what are you doing for your child?
Well, up until he was 6.5 years old, we had tried about everything that there was to try. And he was on medication at that time when, in a fit of rage, he was going to carve up my body. He came after me with a butcher knife. And I decided that, you know, I could disarm him at that point, but what am I going to do when he's 12? As it turns out, he's 5'10" and 150 pounds now. So I had read information on dietary management in times past, but had decided already that it was far too simple to be of any value. But in desperation, because I had tried everything else that was available to me in my area, and with what was available within a halfway reasonable range to drive, and because I was a single parent and working and trying to live with this child, I decided to try it. I took him off of the medication and put him on the dietary management program, and within 4 days it was a whole new ball game.
We're talking about the Fine Gold diet?
Yes, Fine Gold dietary management program, which eliminates colors, flavors, preservatives, and just as important, natural salicylates. And that's one of the key parts of Dr. Feingold's program. And because they're found mostly in wholesome natural foods, most people don't consider those. And particularly with my youngster, it's been the key factor, salicylates.
So 4 days on this diet, you saw an immediate change in behavior in this
After
child.
4 days.
After 4 days.
The 4
on this diet.
days were murder. But the 4th day, it was almost like you had turned a page and there was a strange child living in my house.
Yes, I had the same experience. My son was not as drastic as hers in the beginning. And because I had lived with these other boys, you know, the teacher, by 2nd grade is when it hit the fan. Because by that time, everyone else was sitting still and shutting up, and he couldn't. Now, he was not all over the place. He could sit, like her son, and put things together, and he slept 12 hours at night, and he was an excellent playmate for one person. Could not do team sports. And I used to say, what is wrong with you? Because he was a Jekyll and Hyde. You never knew what his response was going to be. And I found out Dr. Feingold's book by pure luck or the will of God or something, but it came, someone was cleaning out a closet and gave me this book, Why Your Child is Hyperactive, which I still did not believe was my child. And I read it to see what was wrong with my brothers. And I'm reading the symptoms, and I said, oh my God. And I said to Michael, look at this. You know, this is Tommy. It is, you know. And at this point, we already had gone through the 2nd grade where the teacher actually said to him, why did you have to come back to school today? It was so nice when you were absent.
Oh, horrible
you know, this
thing
is
for a
what I'm
teacher to
dealing
say.
with. I want to cry for this child. He's sick all the time, and I'm glad when he has a fever in the morning because I don't have to send him out into this world. And yet, the key word here was appropriate. Why did this 7-year-old who was so intelligent fuss every morning that he had to brush his teeth? That's not appropriate behavior for a 7-year-old. Why? But I don't want to, but I don't want. I said, what is wrong? You know, and these screaming temper tantrums because he had to take a bath, and the night before he screamed because he had to get out. I knew there was something wrong. And we tried it within 3 days. That child said to me, Mommy, my body doesn't feel angry inside anymore. It's the child like who never wears glasses but doesn't know he can't see because he's never had them on. And he did not know why. The teacher would say to him, why did you do that? And he would stand there and she'd say, he's so sullen, he won't even answer me. Well, he didn't know.
And 3 days.
In 3 days.
These are miraculous
and
stories
I can
of treatment.
reproduce those
And I know
symptoms,
there are other opinions here, and we'll get them, but we have to take a break.
Without a lot of psychological things.
We'll be back. Just as the discussion continues in this country about the causes of hyperactivity, so does the discussion and somewhat the controversy continue about the treatment. of hyperactivity. There are 200,000 children in this country currently being treated by diet management. They are members of the Feingold Association. And even though there's no medical proof at this point that diet management or the Feingold diet does do anything for hyperactivity, there are parents, some of whom are here today, who step forward and say, well, it certainly made a difference in my child. We were sent the results of a research study involving some hyperactive children. One was an 8-year-old named Jason, and in front of us is a copy of a handwriting analysis that was done of Jason before going on diet management, is obviously that side of the screen, and then afterwards, in which he found he could form the letters shelf, cabinet, and wall and write them. Now, Pat, you tried the Feingold diet with your children, and it did not work. What was your experience?
Okay, when my eldest was 4, I was willing to try anything, and that book came out, I bought it, and I tried the diet for 6 weeks. And he was going to nursery school, as I mentioned before, and I told him, don't you give them any of your red punch, don't you give him anything. Whatever I put in this sack, that's what I want him to have, and I'm sure they cooperated. So, and I took him off the medication, because they can't be on medication. So I waited about 6 weeks, and at Easter, I called up his teacher at home, and I said, how's my son been doing? She says, I don't know, for the last month he's been driving me crazy. You know, and so then I said to her, well, I took him off the medication when I started that special diet, you know. She says, oh, please put him back on, you know. So then it was, see, I didn't want to influence her. That's why I didn't tell her I took him off of it. I wanted her real opinion.
Now, when you say medication, Pat, what particular? Ritalin. Okay. And he had been on Ritalin for how long before you took him?
Oh, I think about 6 months. I can't remember. That's when he was 4. I just
and you tried the diet for how long?
About 6 weeks.
Now, Terry, 2 things about Terry I want to point out. First of all, you have girls, and so girls are hyperactive. It's not only boys, although there are many more boys who are hyperactive than girls. And you are currently using the Feingold diet.
Yes.
How's it working?
I've found results in my children, and we've been on it now almost 4 years, and my husband and I are now on it, and we have noticed a definite difference. And I started the diet before my children were ever tested, but I knew that something was wrong, and I felt like if I couldn't handle it, then something was really wrong, because I was always up until 2 and 3, and it never bothered me before. And
you considered yourself hyperactive, and your husband as well.
But I never really, it wasn't out of the ordinary for me, because that was just something, you know, that I had lived with. And then when my children started to exceed what I thought was okay, then I thought, well, something better changed. And so I went to the diet, and it's helped us a great deal. My husband at first was reluctant, but now Mark follows the diet as well as us, and he's noticed a big change in himself also.
But obviously it doesn't work for everyone. Della, did it work for you?
No, I've tried, you know, I heard that additives and that don't, you know, you take them off of it and they're okay. Patrick never reacted to them. He was still the same. And I was wondering, Dr. Satterfield, why don't we, you know, use some kind of a diet? You know, I know that we don't.
Why don't you, or why doesn't the foundation?
The foundation, you know, advisor.
The foundation is a research organization, and we have a certain saying, which is that in God we trust and all others need data. And one of the things about the Feingold diet is that everybody has their own individual experience, but there is no substantive data. As a matter of fact, let me read you a little cute quote from the Journal of the American Medical Association. Foundation does not discourage people from using the diet, and our philosophy more or less just follows this quote. And this is from the Journal of the American Medical Association, July of '82. Since the food additive-free diet has no apparent harmful effects, and nobody would say it does, and since the non-specific, that's the placebo, effects of this dietary treatment are frequently very beneficial to families, so people have very good placebo reaction, we see no reason to discourage those families who wish to pursue this type of treatment as long as they continue to follow other therapy which is helpful. If the family asks, however, for the clinician's advice, he or she must cope with the ethical issues involved in recommending a treatment for its placebo effect while the family thinks that the treatment is based on scientific evidence. Okay, so we never say, if you say, what shall I do about my child? I think he's hyperactive. Should I put him on the diet? We believe that it's a placebo effect in the absence of scientific evidence, So we would have to cope with, well, should we tell you something's going to work because it's scientific, or something's going to work because you're going to get that effect
But how do
no
you
matter what
answer
do?
mothers who say that it does work for them?
What I believe is primarily this, that each child is unique, that there are similar characteristics and behaviors that you can identify, and that right now what we're all doing is looking for ways that we can help support that child.
What are you doing? Is your child on medication?
My child is not on medication and has never been on medication. That comes out of a philosophy of trying other options prior to that decision.
Right,
Not that medication is necessarily bad for all children. I'm saying that that may be the only way that some children can get
We
themselves
think
under
medication
control.
alone is bad
However,
for children, by the way.
my feeling about it is this, is that my child is on a limited diet. All food additives have been removed. I can see a distinct difference between when he's had chocolate or had some other kinds of foods that I know are probably full of all kinds of things. And I don't think it's just for hyperactive children. I think all of us are metabolic systems, and that we react to whatever we put into our bodies.
But you're not on the Fine Go diet specifically. You're on just your own kind of nutritional
I'm on
system.
a very, what I would call a very restricted diet with regard to certain very concrete things such as food additives and colors and so on. I also have limited sugar. I also know that the children need educational therapy, that they need support in terms of being able to learn successfully. Not all children who are hyperactive necessarily need the same kinds of treatment in that area as well. Some children have speech and language. You mentioned minimal brain dysfunction. I mean, the list of things, the range of children that are probably being talked about in this room alone is probably quite vast.
No, that's absolutely true, but we want to offer as much as we can
each child.
for the person at home.
That's right.
Who's dealing with all those different kinds of children. So we'll be back in a minute. It's hard enough to get a hyperactive child diagnosed and in the proper school, in the proper environment, and here we are with the controversy surrounding the treatment. I'm curious with Colleen and Sherry, both of you are on the Fine Go diet, both of you say there's been great improvement, and yet Mrs. Satterfield just said there are all these medical studies which show that the diet alone has absolutely no effect.
I'd like to respond to that, Sherry.
Let's go right ahead.
Dr. Feingold's program involves 4 main facets: colors, flavors, preservatives, and salicylates. And I believe I have a copy of most
Della
every...
just asked you a good question. What are salicylates?
Okay, a salicylate is a natural component that's found in many natural wholesome foods, but chemically, it's almost identical with preservatives, and that's why it's important to
Can you
these
give us an
children
example
also.
for those of us who are not nutritionally educated?
Wholesome fruits, a lot of the fruits, apples, oranges, cherries, berries,
Okay.
many of those fruits are loaded with salicylates and cannot be allowed for a preservative-sensitive child, because most often they're also sensitive to salicylates. And I agree, there is not a lot of clinical scientific data that does prove it. But as a mother of a child who lives with this problem, I have a hard time accepting the fact that an objective supervisor could come in and see my child for 15 minutes a week and tell how my child is behaving and how he's doing. And that's the problem I have with the studies.
So you're just going to take your chances even though there's no medical
I
proof
know what's
here?
helped, because I tried everything else.
Well, you never knock what works, but we do hope that parents on the diet will think about something. You know, a lot of things look like they're working now. And what you're concerned with a child, and I want to call hyperactivity by its proper name, attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity. And we think it's a neurophysiological disorder. That means it's in the brain of the child. It's not going to go away.
Absolutely.
What you've got to teach the child is how to live in the world in a socialized, appropriate, and loving fashion.
But
and get love.
what about long-term taking of a drug such as Ritalin? I mean,
We
what
did
do we
a
know
study
about
on
what
that,
that
of
is?
course. Oh, we did a study on that, of course, and we found that Ritalin has no long-term effects. There's never been anyone who's been able to show any long-term
May I ask you who did
deleterious
that
effect.
study? The
Dr. James Satterfield did that study.
Somebody she knows rather well.
Somebody I know quite well.
Yeah,
The
yes, go ahead, Sharon.
I was going to say, the long-term, what I see for my children long-term, this is seems to be the big question here. My children right now can be anything they choose to be in life as long as they're in a position they can feed themselves. It's an inherent genetic defect of theirs. That is, it's like living with a recovered alcoholic.
But we may be talking about different children.
Well,
They
I'm
may
just
have
saying, I'm saying my
nutritionally
children,
different
right.
children.
My child, it's like, if I know that he can be better on the diet, I mean, I just choose to give him Ritalin instead because it's easier for me. That's like a child with hives, and you keep giving antihistamines, you make no effort to find out, instead of eliminating what's causing the hives. I feel each morning we get up, and my children have to make a decision, like a recovered alcoholic. Today, I am this good, beautiful person, as long as I'm not under the influence of something that drives me up the wall and produces all these antisocial and undesirable behavior. So you stay clean that day, they can be anything. They are the stars of their soccer team. They are all stars. They get straight A's. And I can produce any one of the behaviors that she has documented and everything else by simply, even blindly, introducing something. I can tell by their handwriting. I can tell by their behavior. They lose their sense of humor.
By changing the diet,
By
you
changing the diet, even when they're not aware of it.
But you know, you've set up the diet versus a medication, which I think is a very
It's not
false,
a medication.
very
It
false
eliminates
thing
the
of
cause
opposition.
of the problem to begin with. So I don't have to. Listen, if I had not found Dr. Feingold, I would have come running to
I'm
your
not
clinic.
talking about
But
your
I don't
child.
need.
I'm talking about this very phony controversy between a diet and medication. I think the real issue is, does a diet teach? Does a diet socialize?
Diet
Does a
doesn't have
diet
to teach. They
retrain?
do it
If the
themselves.
teaching, socialization, and retraining are happening, if the therapy is happening, the anger in the family is being reduced, none of that comes about from any diet, no matter how
It's
pure.
not true.
I think the issue is, I mean, what's clear here is that any of you would do anything that you thought would work
That's right.
to help
I think
this
that's
child.
the least offensive and the least expensive.
And,
It costs nothing.
and everybody's doing the
Right.
best they can. We'll be back in a minute. Well, we still have a way to go before completely understanding the causes and all of the treatments and controls for the hyperactive child, but we've made a step in that direction today, and thank you all for being a part of that step we made for the parents at home. Certainly, for the future, I think we have to look to continued research on the matter. We have to expect and hope that the skill of experts increases and continues, that the dedication of teachers is something we can count on in our school systems, and the love and patience of parents. And I think woman to woman, it's a good place where we can certainly help each other.
Woman to woman, heart to heart, nothing can ever stop what we started.
Is money or boredom a problem in your marriage? Are you thinking about returning to work? Keeping a job, a husband, and kids can be a major problem. Returning to the rat race tomorrow on Woman to Woman.
I'm so glad I can say every day I can say woman to woman.
For a transcript of this show, send $3 in check or money order to Woman Transcripts, Box 6000, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45201.
Wash up with soap that washes on lotion. Real Jergens lotion.
Jergens lotion-enriched soap in the new Wildflower collection.
For fine cutlery made according to professional standards, see the new Harvard Cutlery collection at participating True Value hardware stores and home centers.
Colds! I hate them!
Mentholate 'em, medicate 'em, penetrate 'em, alleviate 'em, mentholate 'em.
Hello. Hey, for $20,000, how do you say great taste in 4 letters or less? That's it, you win!
Meow makes brand cat food taste so good, cats ask for it by name.
Carrie is so very
different. It doesn't feel like ordinary lotion. It's concentrated. It was specially made for dry, rough skin.
Carrie is so very.
Hotel accommodations for Woman to Woman provided by the Beverly Pavilion of Beverly Hills, a little gem of a hotel.